The banquet hall of the Caith's sovereign. Vessel Echevan was built for creatures who understood stillness, every surface, curved like the inside of a seashell. The lighting pulsed in slow breathing, rhythms that matched the Caith resting. Heart rate, crystal glasses lined the tables, and when touched they sang a single clean note that floated upward and dissolved against the vaulted ceiling like smoke. Sarav Teldra stood before a mirror in the dressing chamber and adjusted the collar of her bonded partner's formal coat. Eli Vaughn held still for her. He always held still for her, like a man who had made a private agreement with his own body to take up less room than it wanted. You're pulling it too tight, he said. You're breathing too much, she said. He smiled. It did something to his face that made him look like different species, something warm-blooded and unhurried, like a dog asleep in a square of sunlight. She fixed the clasp. Her fingers were long, pale blue, faintly luminous. His neck was the width of her thigh. The doors opened. 300 delegates from 11 elder civilizations turned to look at the human. Sarav felt every single gaze land on Eli's shoulders like small, precise weights. The Vithari conquered had governed galactic law for 11,000 years, and their representatives sat at the center table with the posture of beings who had never once been startled by anything. They were startled now. They hid it the way old powerful things always hide fear behind protocol. Bonded partner Vaugh announced the herald of the Caith diplomatic house. Teldara. Eli nodded. He didn't bow. Humans didn't bow in Caith custom. Sarav had coached him on this, but the way he carried his head low and easy read as something else. To the room, the awareness of a large animal choosing to walk slowly through space full of glass. They moved to the table. Sarav's bioluminescence held steady at a warm amber, her public color the one she wore like diplomatic armor, calm, measured, pleased. None of it was a lie. Exactly, but it wasn't the whole frequency either. Eli pulled out her chair before sitting in his own, a human gesture. 3 Caith attendants watched his hands as he did it, the way his fingers wrapped the chair back, the way the wood flexed slightly in his grip. One attendant looked away, the other two did not. Presiding architect Molter Theas of the Vithari conquered approached their table during the first interlude. He was ancient. His species communicated partly through subsonic vibration, and standing near him felt like standing near a concrete buried deep underground. Felt but never heard. Diplomat Tell Dara, he said, you're bonded. A pleasure. He extended a forelimb. Eli took it. Shake was brief and firm. Human standard. Eli released. Molterus did not immediately withdraw. Sarav caught it, the faint tremor in the architect's secondary forelimb, the micro-adjustment of his biometric crest. He was reading Eli, not through conversation, through touch, a scan. Dressed up in a handshake, she said. Nothing. Her light held amber. Within 4 minutes she watched the data ripple outward through the delegation. Tables like a stone dropped into still water. Arathani leaned toward her colleague. A dome observer adjusted his optical array and redirected it at Eli. 2 Vithari advisors exchanged a glyph pulse that Sarav's training allowed her to partially translate. Confirm. Confirm. Request secondary analysis. Bone density 4 times the galactic median for sentient bipeds. Muscle fiber composition consistent with apex predator morphology. Adrenal capacity beyond any previously recorded threshold. For a sapient species, numbers that didn't belong on someone who was currently trying to figure out which fork to use for the salad. Eli picked up the wrong one. He glanced at Sorev. She tilted her chin. Fraction to the left, their signal. He switched forks. Nobody at the table. Breathed for a moment, and then everyone breathed at once, and the evening continued. Dalek Velowan was seated 3 tables away. Sorev didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She could feel his light in her peripheral awareness. Cool, controlled silver watching dial had been her intended once, a political pairing, elegant, appropriate. He had the kind of mind that moved through problems the way water moves through stone. He would have been a fine match. He was not Eli. She had chosen Eli on a refueling station above the corp expanse, in a commissary that smelled like engine coolant and overcooked grain. He'd been sitting alone, reading a paper book. Actual cellulose, dogered and coffee stained, and he'd looked up when she entered and said, "Fair warning, the soup here tastes like someone described soup to a machine that had never eaten." She'd sat down anyway. That was 2 years ago. Now he sat in a room full of gods and tried not to hold his bread roll too hard. The roll cracked. It was a small sound, dry grain splitting under pressure, but in the acoustic design of the Echevan's banquet hall, small sounds carried. The Dalchem delegate beside Eli paused mid-chew. His optical array rotated 40 degrees. He buttered the roll with a tiny knife that looked like a toy in his hand and offered half to Sorev. She took it. Her bioluminescence flickered just once, just for a half-second, into a deep violet that had no translation in any galactic standard language. If anyone in the room had been calibrated to read Kaith chromatic registers at that depth, they would have flagged it. None were. The moment passed. Eli ate his bread. He complimented the Rathani delegate across the table on her ceremonial sash. He mispronounced 2 words in the compliment and corrected himself with a grin that made the Rathani's neck frills flatten in an involuntary relaxation response. He asked the server if there was more of that purple stuff, meaning the cave fermented kelp wine, and said thank you in 3 languages, getting one of them roughly right. He was kind. That was the thing the room kept tripping over. Not gentle as a performance, not careful as a strategy, kind the way a person is kind when they have never considered being otherwise, like it was the default setting and everything else was the deviation. Sorev watched 11 civilizations try to fit that kindness into the same container as his biometric profile. She watched them fail. After the banquet, in the corridor back to their guest quarters, Eli loosened his collar and exhaled like a man surfacing from deep water. "That went okay, right?" he said. Sorev looked at him. His face was open, searching, wanting her answer the way child wants to know if the drawing is good enough to go on the fridge. "It went well," she said. He nodded, relieved. His fingers closed around hers with a pressure so carefully modulated. It must have taken years of practice, years of learning exactly how much of himself to offer and how much to keep. Locked behind his ribs, they walked. Behind them, the Ashavan's banquet hall was still humming with subsonic conversation, delegates exchanging data, analysts running models, ancient civilizations trying to build a framework large enough to contain a man who cracked bread rolls too loud and said thank you in broken Rathani. Nate Colby showed up on Meridian Station with 2 bottles of bourbon, a deck of cards held together by a rubber band, and the particular energy of a man who had been alone on a freight hauler for 11 days and had forgotten how to regulate his volume. "Sora," he shouted from the doorway, arms wide, bottle each hand, like a man surrendering to joy. "You're glowing, literally. Is that a compliment?" "I'm making it a compliment." Sora's bioluminescence shifted to a light rippling gold, the Kaith equivalent of a laugh. She was trying to keep dignified. "Nate, you smell like engine grease." "Thank you." Eli appeared behind her, and Nate dropped both bottles into one hand and hugged him with the other. The hug lasted 4 seconds too long, and neither of them acknowledged that. They settled into the apartment. It was a small place, human standard quarters with cave lighting modifications that made the walls pulse in slow tidal rhythms. Eli had built the dining table himself out of reclaimed station alloy. It was ugly in the way that only something made with real hands and wrong measurements can be ugly, which is to say it was the best table on the station. Nate dealt the cards wrong 3 times. He talked while he dealt about a cargo run to the Peller Belt, about a docking clamp that almost took his starboard in a sell-off, about a Rathani customs officer who had asked him if bourbon was a weapon. I said, "Technically, yes." Nate said she didn't laugh. "Rathani never laugh. You ever notice that? 11,000 years of civilization, and nobody thought to invent a joke. They have jokes." Sorry, said, "You simply don't recognize the structure. The structure is wrong, Sora. A joke needs a setup, a turn, and a landing. What they do is more like a math problem that makes you feel slightly sad. That is also what your jokes do," she said. Eli grinned. Evening was warm and alive and smelled like bourbon and the particular ozone scent of Kaith bioluminescent skin, and for a while it was easy to believe that this was all there was. 3 people who liked each other playing cards badly in a small room at the edge of mapped space. Sorave's communicator chimed diplomatic channel. She excused herself and stepped into the bedroom, pulling the door shut behind her. The room changed, not the lighting, not the temperature. Something in the air between the 2 men rearranged itself, the way furniture shifts in a house when the foundation settles. Nate's smile didn't fall. It just emptied out like someone had poured the warmth out of it and left the shape. He looked at his cards. "You tell her." Eli dealt another hand. The cards landed on the ugly table in small, precise sounds. Tap, tap, tap. "Eli, she knows I was Salvage Corps. She knows about the engagement at Orth. She knows you were there. Does she know what you did?" Tap, tap. "There's a difference," Nate said, "between knowing your husband served in a conflict and knowing I know the difference." Nate picked up his cards. He didn't look at them. "The Concord is going to pull that file. Wyatt can sit on it for a while, but these people have been running the galaxy since before humans figured out bronze. They'll get it, I know, and when they get it, Sora's going to see it too. Not from you, from whatever 11,000-year-old filing clerk decides to make it public." Eli set his cards down. His hands were flat on the table. They were large hands, scarred across the knuckles in patterns that didn't come from salvage work. He looked at them the way a man looks at tools he isn't sure he trusts anymore. "What do you want me to say, Nate?" Nate's mouth opened, closed. He took a drink, then another. "I want you to say you've got a Plan for when she watches the footage of you holding B corridor for 4 hours against a full red assault swarm by yourself while the rest of us were trying to keep 16 civilians from bleeding out behind you. The words landed in the small room and sat there like something heavy placed on a table. That wasn't built to hold it, Eli said. Nothing, because I've watched that footage, brother. Wyatt made me watch it during debriefing, and I've seen a lot of things out here. I've seen ships break apart. I've seen decompression take people in front of me. I've seen all the ways the universe reminds you it doesn't care, but I have never in my life seen anything like what you did in that corridor. Made the sounds the hall made the sounds you made. You should have dropped at the 40-minute mark. Any human, any being in any database should have collapsed, and you kept. His voice cracked. He covered it with a laugh, the kind that has no humor in it. 4 hours, Eli. What even are you? I'm a guy who builds bad tables and loses at cards. You're the reason 16 people are alive, including 3 kids, and also the reason the VRI reclassified humans from minor territorial species to extinction-level threat in their strategic database. Silence. Mate poured another drink. His hands were shaking slightly. He held the glass with both hands to steady it, the way a person holds something when they need to hold anything at all. She should hear it from you, he said, not from a file, not from a tribunal, from you in this kitchen at this stupid table. Eli looked at the table. He had built it from salvage alloy, the same grade they used for hull reinforcement on deep space vessels. He had cut the pieces himself, bent them by hand where the station's welding tools couldn't reach. The legs were slightly uneven. Sarif had put a folded napkin under one corner and never mentioned it. I don't know how to tell her, he said, without it becoming the only thing she sees. Nate stared at him. You think she doesn't already see it? The bedroom door opened. Sarif stepped back into the kitchen. Her light was steady, diplomatic amber, smooth and controlled, but her eyes moved between the 2 men with the precision of someone who could read the shape of a conversation from its silence. She looked at Nate's hands around the glass. She looked at Eli's hands flat on the table. She looked at the space between them where something had been said and not finished. She didn't ask. She sat down. She picked up her cards. She rearranged them with her long blue fingers and said, Nate, you have been dealing from the bottom of the deck for the last 3 hands. Slander. Your left wrist rotates 11 degrees when you cheat. It is not subtle. It's a little subtle. It is not. Eli looked at her. Something behind his ribs loosened. A fraction, not all the way. Not even close, but enough that he could breathe without the air tasting like corridor metal. He picked up his cards. They played 3 more hands. Nate lost all of them, even the ones where he cheated. Sarif won with the calm precision of someone who had spent her career reading alien body language for a living and found human poker faces charmingly transparent. Eli came in second every round, not because he was bad at cards, but because he kept watching Sarif and LT Unk and GT's light shift colors when she bluffed, a faint rose gold bloom along her jaw that she probably didn't know she was doing. He didn't tell her she was doing it. Some things you keep to yourself, not because they're secrets, because they're the small private proof that someone is real and alive and sitting close enough to touch, and that the universe, for all its corridors and swarms and sounds that Halls make when they're failing. Sometimes puts you in a kitchen with a bad table and good cards and a woman whose skin literally glows when she's happy. Nate left at midnight. He hugged Eli in the doorway again, too long. Again, and whispered something that Sarev's Kaith hearing caught but her translation matrix couldn't parse. It was tell her man she can take it. The door closed. Eli turned off the lights. Sarev's glow was the only illumination left, soft, deep gold like the last coals of a fire that has been burning all night. She took his hand in the dark, the tribunal chamber aboard the Vithari flagship Eternal Consideration was shaped like the inside of a throat. The walls narrowed as they rose, tunneling sound upward into a vaulted dome where acoustic dampeners caught every word and held it, preserved it the way the conquered preserved everything, every law, every precedent, every grudge, dressed in the language of governance. Sarev stood at the respondent's platform, her light held a steady, cool white, public mode armor. Mode, the frequency she wore when she intended to be precise and wanted everyone to know it. Across from her, seated in a crescent of elevated platforms, the Vithari conquered watched with the patience of species who measured time in geological layers. Presiding architect Mol Thuris occupied the center seat. His subsonic hum was pitched low enough to vibrate the floor beneath Sarev and LT Unk and GT's feet. The matter before this body, Mol Thuris began, concerns the application of the doctrine of existential disparity to the bonded union of diplomat Teldara and the human designated Eli Vaugh, designated not named, designated like a coordinates or a hazard classification. Sarev let the word pass. She would address it later surgically when the timing would cause maximum damage. Doctrine of existential disparity was old law, older than most of the species. Invoking it, it had been written during the Voric expansion when the conquered needed a legal framework to prevent apex predator species from forming political alliances through interspecies bonding. The doctrine argued that when one partner in a bonded union exceeded biological thresholds that classified them as a potential existential threat, the union itself became a security concern. It had been used 4 times in 11,000 years, twice against the Rathani, once against the DM, once against a species that no longer existed, which said something about the doctrine's track record that Sarev intended to make very clear. She spoke for 11 minutes. She dismantled the doctrine's historical precedent the way a surgeon removes a tumor with small, deliberate cuts that left the surrounding tissue intact but the growth exposed and dying. She cited the Rathani cases, both overturned within a century. She cited the DM case, overturned and formally apologized for. She cited the 4th case, the species that no longer existed, and let the silence after their name do the work she was too professional to do with her voice. The gallery was quiet. Several conquered delegates adjusted their postures in ways that their species used to signal discomfort. Malphys's subsonic hum dropped another octave. Then Drich Veloon rose to speak. He was tall even for a cave, 7.5 feet of silver blue light and perfect posture. His luminescence was controlled to a degree that even Sarevi found impressive, and she had trained for decades. Every color he emitted was chosen, every flicker was rhetoric. He did not speak as a legal representative. He spoke as a cultural witness, a Khalid citizen offering testimony on the nature of the bond in question. I have known diplomat Teldra for most of my life, he said. His voice was measured, each word placed like a stone. In a garden path, she is among the finest minds our civilization has produced. Her curiosity is vast, her capacity for analysis is without peer. He paused. The pause was elegant. Practiced. It is precisely this curiosity, he said, that I believe led her to the human. He used the word Thilvaris. It detonated in the chamber like a quiet bomb. Sarev's light went cold, not dim, cold. The chromatic difference was subtle too. Non-Kaith eyes, but every member of her species in the gallery felt it. Thilvaris met a fascination that consumed the one fascinated, a fire that was mistaken for warmth until it had already taken the house. Delrich was not calling her foolish, he was calling her burned. Eli sat in the gallery beside Admiral Karen Wyatt. He understood Sarev's reaction, the way her shoulders set, the way her fingers pressed flat against the platform, the way her light went to a color he had never seen in their kitchen, or their bed, or their life. Wyatt leaned toward him. Don't move, she murmured. Don't react, they're watching you. He didn't move. Dretch finished his testimony. It was compassionate and devastating, and it painted Eli as a storm that Sarev had walked into with her eyes open, not out of love but out of a brilliance that had mistaken danger for discovery. Then Moeller called for the demonstration. He didn't use that word. Of course, he called it a calibration assessment, a standard biometric evaluation to establish baseline parameters for the tribunal's analysis. Routine, administrative. Sarev would have believed that if she were anyone else. They brought Eli to a sealed arena in the lower decks. The walls were transparent from the outside, opaque from within. The gallery above was full. Every delegation, every aide, every analyst with clearance. In the center of the arena stood Athari Combat Construct. It was 12 FD tall. Its body was biomechanical, grown, not built, with plated armor that shifted and reformed in response to threat. Assessment. It had been designed to pacify capital ships during the Vork expansion. There were 6 of them in existence. The Conquered had activated one for this demonstration. Eli looked at it. He looked at the gallery above. He looked at Sarev, who stood at the transparent wall with her hands flat against the surface and her light cycling through frequencies he had never seen. He looked back at the construct. Can I decline? He asked. The Conquered official beside him, a small, meticulous Vithari functionary, told him that diplomat Teldara's legal standing in the tribunal was contingent on the completion of the assessment. Eli stopped asking. He rolled his shoulders. He cracked his neck, a human gesture that made the functionary take 2 steps backward. He breathed in. He breathed out. The construct activated. It moved. First fast, faster than anything that size should move, covering the distance between them in a blur of shifting plate and hydraulic muscle. The gallery tensed. Several delegates gripped their rails. Eli sidestepped, not dramatically, not with flair or fury. He moved the way a man steps around a puddle, practical, unhurried, efficient. The construct strike hit the floor where he had been standing and cracked the composite alloy in a web of fracture lines. Eli was already behind it. His hands found a joint, a seam where 2 armor plates met, and the biomechanical tissue beneath was exposed. He didn't hit it. He leveraged it. Pulled, twisted, the construct's left arm locked at a wrong angle, and Eli used the momentum to redirect the entire mass into the arena. Wall. The wall held the construct. Recalibrated, it came again. Eli met it. Not with strength against strength, with geometry, angles, pressure points. He moved through the construct's attacks the way a mechanic moves through an engine. Finding the systems, understanding the tolerances, applying force only where force would accomplish something. 60 seconds, Eli had found the stabilization tendon, a cable of biometallic fiber buried under 3 in of armor, and severed it with a strike that used the edge of his hand like a chisel. 70 seconds, the construct compensated. Rerouted power, shifted to upper body. Engagement, its remaining arm came down. Like a piston. Eli caught it. The gallery went silent, not quiet, silent. The absolute absence of sound that happens when 300 beings from 11 civilizations watch something there. Models cannot contain. He held the construct's arm, his feet were braced on the cracked floor, his muscles were visible through his shirt. Not bulging, not straining, just engaged. In a way that looked like the mechanical function of a species that had been built for exactly this, for holding things that should not be holdable. He pushed the construct's shoulder joint. Failed with a sound like a ship hull breaching. 90 seconds, the construct stopped functioning. Eli stood in the center of the arena. He was breathing evenly, his heart rate displayed on the galleries. Biometric feeds was elevated, but recovering fast, faster than any model predicted. The analysts watching the feeds began entering notes with the frantic energy of people who have just watched their entire framework become obsolete. The gallery didn't applaud. Applause would have required a framework for what they just witnessed, a category, a context, a place to put it. They had none. Several delegates had left their seats, drifting toward the back of the gallery in the old animal way that predates civilization and politics and reason. Distance from the thing that just happened. Dritch Veloon was still seated. His hands were wrapped around his rail. His light had gone to a color Sarif had never seen on him, pale, washed, the Kaith equivalent of a face gone white. Sarif walked onto the arena floor. The conquered officials moved to stop her. She ignored them the way she had spent her career ignoring inconvenient protocol, completely and without acknowledgement. She crossed the cracked composite. She reached Eli. His knuckles were bleeding, split across the ridges where he had struck the construct's armor. His hands hung at his sides, open and loose, the way they always hung after he'd used them for something he didn't want to use them for. She took his hand, her light wrapped around his bleeding fingers. Warm gold, deliberate, steady, not a medical gesture, not a diplomatic gesture, a choice made in full view of every camera, every delegate, every ancient civilization watching from their elevated seats. She held his hand, and her light said what her voice did not need to. This is what I chose. Watch closely. The gallery watched. They could not look away. The footage leaked on a Tuesday. By Wednesday it was everywhere. Every galactic news feed, every diplomatic channel, every darknet archive. Beings went to watch things they weren't supposed to watch. Someone inside the Conquered had fed it to the press, not the tribunal footage, not the arena, the other file, the classified one. The one Admiral Wyatt had buried so deep it should have needed 3 security clearances and a dead man's key to reach Orth 7, Sarev found it the way everyone else found it, on a screen without warning between a trade report and a weather advisory for the core expanse. The headline was clinical. Declassified combat record of human Eli VA during Orth colonial defense engagement. Eli was asleep in the next room. He slept the way he did everything, quietly, efficiently, taking up as little space as possible on his side of the bed, even though the bed was built for a Keith frame and he could have spread out like a starfish and still not reach the edges. She opened the file. The footage was from the station's internal security system, fixed cameras, no audio for the first 40 minutes, then audio that she wished had stayed missing. The image quality was poor, the lighting was emergency red, none of that mattered. She watched a man she slept beside every night stand in a corridor no wider than their kitchen and refused to fall down. The VRI assault swarm hit the station at 3:40 local time. They breached through the cargo bay and moved inward fast, coordinated the way a species that had evolved for pack hunting always moved. Eli was on salvage rotation. He shouldn't have been anywhere near B corridor, but B corridor was the last barrier between the breach sections and the civilian shelter, where 16 people, including 4 children, were locked behind a blast door that was rated for decompression, not for a direct assault. He got there first. He sealed the corridor's forward access with a manual override that fused the door controls. Nothing was getting through that door without going through the corridor. Nothing was getting through the corridor without going through him. The first wave hit at the 9-minute mark. Sarev watched Eli meet it with a length of hull strutty torn from the wall, torn, not cut, the metal sheared along its mounting bolts by a force the security footage's motion sensors couldn't properly track. He fought. The word felt inadequate. Fighting implied a contest, a back and forth, a possibility of outcome in either direction. What Eli did in that corridor was something else. Not a defensive position, a physical, geographic line, a place on the floor that he stood on and would not leave. And every wreck that crossed it stopped being alive. The time stamp ran 10 minutes 20:30. At the 40-minute mark, the station's biometric emergency system, designed to remotely monitor crew vital signs during crisis events, flagged Eli's readings: heart rate 240 beats per minute, blood oxygen dropping, core temperature rising past the threshold for human organ failure, lactic acid levels that should have locked his muscles into useless knots. He should have collapsed. Every medical model in the station's database, every biological reference for human physiology, every precedent from every conflict humans had ever been involved in said his body should have shut down. The time stamp kept running. 1 hour. The second wave hit bigger, more coordinated. Eli was slower now. Sarev could see it in the footage, the fractional delay in his reactions, the way his left leg dragged slightly, the way his shoulders hunched as something inside him broke and was ignored. 2 hours. He hadn't made a sound for the first 90 minutes. Now the audio caught something, a low continuous noise that the system's classifier tagged as vocalization, human unknown subtype. It wasn't screaming, it wasn't grunting, it was the sound a body makes when the person inside it has gone somewhere past Pain and past fear and past everything. That has a name, and all that's left is the mechanical animal function of continuing. 3 hours the hull strut broke, he used the pieces. When the pieces broke, he used his hands. The corridor walls were painted in a color that the security feed rendered as black, but that Sarev's analytical mind knew was not black. 3 hours and 40 minutes the fourth wave stopped coming, not a retreat, a reassessment. They had classified the corridor as intraversible, not blocked, not defended. Intraversible, a word there. Species used for natural hazards, geological formations, tectonic events. They classified a single human man as a geological event. 4 hours and 6 minutes. After the first contact, a United Systems response team breached the station's outer hull and engaged the remaining Vret forces. They found Eli standing in B corridor, standing, not sitting, not collapsed, not braced, against a wall, standing in the middle of a corridor that no longer looked like a corridor, holding a piece of broken hull strut in his right hand and nothing in his left, because 3 of his fingers on that hand were broken and the hand couldn't close anymore. The response team's point officer, a combat veteran with 14 years of service, looked at the corridor, looked at Eli, and requested immediate psychological support for his own team. Behind the blast door, 16 civilians were alive. 3 of them were children under the age of 10. They were scared and dehydrated, and one of them had a broken arm from the initial station impact. All of them were alive. Sarev stopped the footage. She sat in their kitchen. The clock on the wall said 3:14 a.m. station time. The table Eli had built, the ugly one, the one with a folded napkin under the corner leg, held her communicator and a cold cup of Kythe tea she didn't remember making. Her bioluminescence was cycling through frequencies she didn't know she could produce. Deep violet, deeper past violet, into a range that her species medical texts called sacred terror. A chromatic response so rare it was documented only in historical accounts of Kythe, who had witnessed events that exceeded their species' framework for comprehension. Astronomical events, the birth of stars, the death of worlds. She rewound the footage. She found the 40 and Ute mark, the moment his body should have failed. She watched his legs buckle and then unbuckle. She watched him straighten. She watched him stay. She played it again and again. She was still sitting there when Eli found her. He came out of the bedroom the way he always did, barefoot, hair flattened on one side, squinting in the kitchen light like a man who had been dreaming about something simple and pleasant and was not entirely ready to let it go. He saw the screen. He saw himself on it. A younger version, thinner, covered things he didn't let himself remember. He saw Sarev's light. He turned the screen off. Neither spoke. He moved to the counter, filled the kettle. The sound of water hitting metal was the only noise in the apartment for a long time. He made coffee, human coffee, the kind that smelled like burnt earth and tasted like a decision to keep going. He set a mug in front of her. She wrapped both hands around it. Her fingers were shaking from something she didn't have a Kythe word for, something that lived in the space between awe and grief, and a love so large it felt like a structural failure. They sat in the kitchen until the station's artificial dawn began to warm the walls. Dritch contacted her that afternoon. Private channel, no political frequency. He spoke in the old dialect. the one they had used as children before. Diplomacy and protocol and the careful architecture of public language. He didn't gloat, he didn't press. His voice was stripped of everything except the sound of a man who had once loved someone and was watching her hold hands with a thing his civilization had no classification for. What you are bonded to, he said, does not have a name in our language. Sorry if she said nothing. I am not speaking of danger, I am speaking of category. Our poets have written of strength. Our historians have catalogued power. What he did in that corridor is neither. It is a different thing, a thing we have no framework to contain. His light, even through the screen, was the color of grief. I loved you, he said. I say this not as a claim but as a context. I loved you, and I am watching you hold the hand of something my entire species would have written as a warning tale. And I cannot tell if you are the bravest person I have ever known or the most lost. She closed the channel. Nate arrived 2 hours later unannounced, smelling like freight corridors and bourbon. He was not sober. He was not trying to be. He sat at the ugly table across from Sarave and told her about Orth 7, not the footage version, the version that lived inside the two men who had been there. He held that corridor because the math was simple. Nate said his eyes were wet. He didn't wipe them. 16 people behind him, a door that wouldn't hold, and something in human wiring I don't know what to call it. Sora, I don't think anyone knows what to call it. Something that just doesn't allow you to walk away when the math is that simple. Not won't, doesn't. Like gravity, like a law of physics that only applies to us. He laughed. It was not a laugh. The dumbest, most beautiful thing in the whole stupid galaxy. He said, that's what we are. That's what he is. Too stubborn to die when dying makes more sense than anything. Sarave's light stabilized, warm gold, steady, the frequency of a woman who had just watched the worst thing she'd ever seen and come out the other side holding a mug of human coffee at a crooked table. Stay for dinner, she said. Nate stayed for dinner. The tribunal gallery was full for the final session, every seat occupied, every species with representation on the Vahari conquered had sent their senior delegates there. Analysts, their archivists, beings whose purpose was to witness and preserve, to make sure that whatever was said in this chamber would be carved into the permanent record of galactic governance. Admiral Karen Wyatt sat in the human delegation's row with her jaw set so tight the muscles in her neck were visible. She had not slept in 2 days. She had spent those 2 days on secure channels with every intelligence contact. She had trying to find who had leaked the Orth 7 file. She had not found them. She had found something worse. The leak had not come from one source. It had come from several. The file had been released simultaneously across multiple conquered information networks, which meant it was not a leak at all. Someone in the Concord's upper structure had decided the galaxy should see what Eli Vaughn was. Wyatt sat with that knowledge in her chest like a piece of shrapnel she couldn't reach. Eli sat beside her. He was wearing the same formal coat Sarave had adjusted before the banquet, the one with the clasp she always pulled too tight. His hands were in his lap. The knuckles had healed from the arena, but the skin was still new and pink, and he kept running his thumb across the ridges like a man reading Braille he couldn't quite translate. Presiding Architect Molteris called the chamber to order. His subsonic hum filled the room like a tide coming in. Slow, heavy, patient, he summarized the proceedings, he referenced the doctrine of existential disparity, he referenced, without naming it directly, the combat record that had by now been viewed by an estimated 4 billion beings across mapped space. Then he called Sarev Teldara for her final statement. She rose from the respondent's platform. Her bioluminescence was steady, not amber, not white, not any of the public frequencies she had worn throughout these proceedings. She was glowing a soft deep gold, the color she wore at home, the color Eli saw when she laughed at something he said, or when she was reading in bed and found a passage that pleased her, or when she woke in the morning and reached for him before she was fully conscious. She had chosen to stand before 11 civilizations wearing the color of her private life. She did not bring notes. She did not bring data. She did not reference legal precedent. I will tell you a story, she said. It is short. It is the only argument I have left, and it is the only one that matters. The gallery settled. 300 beings leaned forward by fractions. The first night, Eli moved into my quarters aboard the diplomatic frigate. He could not sleep. Human circadian rhythms do not align with with lighting cycles. The room was too dim for him. The pulse frequency was wrong. His body did not know where it was. She paused, not for effect, for accuracy. She was remembering. He did not wake me. He did not adjust the lights. He sat on the floor beside the bed, and he read a book, a physical book, paper and ink, imported from Earth at a cost that I later discovered was more than his monthly salvage pay. He sat on the floor in the dark and turned pages with one hand. Another pause. His other hand rested on the edge of the bed frame, not touching me, near me, close enough that if I reached in my sleep, he would be there. Not the political quiet of calculation, a different quiet, the kind that happens when beings who have lived a long time recognize something older than their institutions. I woke in the deep night. I found him there on the floor, reading by the light of my skin, because bioluminescence, even in sleep, emits enough light to read by if you hold the page close enough. She looked at the conquered. She looked at their Thays. She looked at Doll seated in the cultural witness section, his light silver and still, the hand that held that book, she said, is the same hand that held B corridor on or 7 for 4 hours. The sentence landed in the chamber, and everything on either side of it went silent. You have all seen the footage now. The entire galaxy has seen it. You have watched that hand break a combat construct designed to pacify warships. You have watched it hold a whole strut until the hull strut broke, and then continue holding the air where the hull strut used to be, because the math was simple and the people behind him were alive, and he was not finished. Her voice was even. Her light was gold. I have also watched that footage. I watched it at 3:00 in the morning in our kitchen while he slept. I watched the moment his body should have failed and didn't. I watched him stay. She stepped forward 1 step, the platform's edge. You look at that hand and you see a weapon. You see a threat classification. You see a number on a biometric chart that exceeds your models and frightens your analysts and keeps your defense strategists awake at night. She lifted her chin. I look at that hand and I see the page he was on. The quiet deepened. It was a collection of poems by a human named Robert Frost. The spine of the book was cracked at a particular poem. cracked from rereading, from returning to the same page again and again, the way humans return to the things that hold them together. The poem was about a man traveling through snow and woods at night. The man wanted to stop. The woods were dark and deep, and the stopping would have been easy, but he did not stop because he had promises to keep. The book is still on our nightstand. The spine is still cracked at that page. Eli does not know that I have read it. He does not know that I understand why he returns to it. He does not know that I have spent 2 years watching him make the same choice that man in the poem makes every day, in every room, in every small and ordinary moment. The choice to not stop, the choice to keep his promises, to be present, to hold the page in one hand and keep the other hand close enough that if I reach he will be there. She looked at Molteris. You ask me to justify my bond. You invoked a doctrine designed to protect the galaxy from existential threats. You brought my partner into an arena and made him break a machine so you could measure the force and call it evidence. Her light shifted, not brighter, not dimmer, different, a frequency that the chamber's translation systems flagged and attempted to render, and could not. The linguistic AI, one of the most advanced in the Concord's inventory, capable of real-time translation across 8,000 known languages, returned a single notation, untranslatable chromatic expression. The notation appeared on every delegate's display. Several of them stared at it. In 11,000 years of Concord proceedings, the translation system had never returned that result. Do you not fear what he is? Molteris asked. The question was quiet, stripped of formality, an old being asking a real question for perhaps the first time in centuries. Sarev answered in the frequency the translators could not name. Then she answered in words. You are asking the wrong question, she said. You are asking whether I fear his strength. I do not. His strength is not the remarkable thing. She turned to the gallery, to the 300 delegates and analysts and archivists who had come to witness and preserve. The remarkable thing is that he chooses every minute of every day to be gentle. The strength is the raw material. The gentleness is the craft. You are frightened by the material. She paused. I married the craft. The chamber held still. Eli in the gallery looked at his hands, the new pink skin across his knuckles, the width of his palms, the fingers that had held a corridor and a book in a coffee mug, and the edge of a bed frame in the dark. He closed them. He opened them. He didn't look up. He didn't need to. Sarev and LT Unk and GT's light reached him from across the chamber. Warm gold, steady, certain, and it was enough. It was the same light he read by. At night, Molteris called for the vote. The vote took 7 seconds. The result would be logged in Concord archives, alongside 11,000 years of legal history. Scholars would study it. Diplomats would cite it. Species that had not yet achieved spaceflight would one day learn about it in their first zine history courses. But before the vote, there were 7 seconds of silence. 7 seconds in which 11 ancient civilizations, beings who had mapped galaxies and tamed stars and written laws that governed 1,000 worlds, sat with a feeling that none of their languages had a word for. Not fear, not awe, not admiration. Something else, something that lived in the space between what a being is capable of and what it chooses to do. Something that humans carried in their bones like a second skeleton and never thought to name because they had never needed to. It was just there, the way gravity is just there, fundamental and invisible and holding everything together. The gods could not name it. They voted to let it stay. That night, Eli sat on the floor of their quarters. On Meridian Station, the Kaith lighting pulsed in slow breathing rhythms. He held the book, the same one, the paper copy with the cracked spine and the coffee stain on page 43. He read in the soft gold light of Sarev's sleeping glow, turning pages with one hand. His other hand rested on the edge of the bed frame. Sarev reached down. Her fingers found his shoulder, the curve of muscle and bone that she had learned the geography of over 2 years of nights like this one. His hand came up, careful, deliberate, every ounce of its impossible force gentled down to a pressure that would not bruise a flower. He covered her hand with his. Her light went warm, the room filled with it, gold and steady, the frequency of a woman who had chosen and been chosen, who had seen the worst thing and the best thing, and understood that they lived in the same pair of hands. The book lay open on his knee, the page he always returned to, the words about woods and snow and a man who did not stop. He had promises to keep.